So the Global Dimensions School Inventory is really an opportunity for schools to look at how they're prioritizing and modeling the definition of global citizenship. And you guys can all see my slides, yes? Okay. Um, I think we're all familiar with the global citizenship definition, but I always think that not everybody in our school is, so it's a good idea to start with that anytime you're working with a group that maybe isn't as familiar with it, just as that reminder, especially those of us who were in Seattle a couple of weeks ago, of all of the different components that fit into this definition. And as Catherine mentioned, it's a survey. It was originally designed to look at these 8 areas of school life that we thought had helped create a robust global school culture. And so those areas are curriculum, communications and technology, co-curricular programming, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, ecological justice, reconciliation, service and justice, interculturality, and staff formation. And within each of those areas, there are sub areas or subcategories, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And each subcategory really has you look at 3 different things. One of them is how have you already focused effort or investment in this area as a school community? What programs have you already launched in this area? And do you anticipate that this area will be a high priority for you in the next 1 to 2 years, so 12 to 24 months? And this is an example of what one of the areas might look like. So this is for area 1. Item 1.1 says core and elective course offerings that reflect the Ignatian definition of a global citizenship. So you can see at the top, and there's a sheet, a packet, if you will, that goes with this that has each of these outlined on its own page. So within the school, is this an area where we're putting a lot of effort, some minimal or none? There's a checklist of some examples of programs that we might have, and you'll notice there's a little other category, and then an opportunity to circle how we're prioritizing this. And I'll come back to this in a moment just to talk about how we used it in our school. Just to show another example under area 1, this has to do with curriculum. So creating or aligning structures for academic planning and learning that enhance our ability to live out a commitment to the Ignatian definition of global citizenship. So again, the effort part is the same. This has some different checklists for types of programs that we might have. And then again, that priority line. So when we think about our responses to this, before I talk about what we did at our school and what the purpose of the survey is, really, it's meant to be formative and not evaluative, which I think is important to remember. It's meant to help each individual school identify relevant next steps based on that school's interests, areas of interest, and priorities. When you fill out the survey, it's important to look at it based on your best gut sense and looking at really, have we made an effort to address this area in a meaningful way? Because again, it's not a checklist, even though there's boxes, it's not meant to be a checklist. Those are meant to be conversation starters. And is this on the radar for attention or resource priority? And there's no implication that everybody can do all of these. We can't have all of them be high strategic priorities. And so the goal is to collect information about each school's progress and their actual priorities so that the JSN can provide relevant information and resources. And just as a reminder, we all know this, but global citizenship is a journey, and all schools are at different points on that journey. And every school has its own competing priorities. And with that, I would say too that every school has its own things to celebrate. So it's never a comparison or a competition. It's more an opportunity in true Ignatian fashion to reflect on what we are doing well and maybe where we see gaps or areas where we might want to put more effort. For us at Jesuit, when I filled out the survey 2 years ago, the very first thing I did was I met with some key program directors. And for us, that was our DEI office. I oversee ecological justice, so that component, our Christian service directors, and global programming, which was also me. So just to get an idea and begin to go through, because with just those 3 or 4 positions, we were able to answer a lot of questions on our own and brainstorm ideas. Once I had done that, then I met with our Jesuit leadership team. And that's a team that meets every 2 weeks or so. And so it was easy for me to get on the schedule because there's a standing meeting. And that is our president, our vice presidents, our principal, our vice principals, program directors, and we have 2 Jesuits on campus. They both sit on that team. So I met with them, and I'll talk about that process in a moment. And then I compiled the data and put it into the survey. So, as I mentioned, I administered it at one of our leadership team meetings. Those run about an hour to 1.25 hours. So, it's not a huge chunk of time, but it was enough when it was done in a strategic way. And I'll show you what that looked like. We had about 18 people in the room, and what I did is I divided them into 4 groups, and each group reflected on 2 of those 8 areas. So, we kind of divided and conquered. And this process came from the JSN. So I have slides at the end of the presentation that go into more depth for this. But the general process that we used was I explained the concept of the global dimensions inventory. And then we took 2 minutes to get organized and assign a facilitator, a note taker, a timekeeper, and a reporter. And then we took 25 minutes, which again was not a lot of time, but to go through each item, allowing about 4 minutes per item. So just again, brainstorming. This was not a time to necessarily discuss. So just talk about all the different things that we could think of that fit into this category or into this area. And then took 5 minutes to go back to anything that might have been tabled if there was something that was unclear or it was conversation was going in a different direction, but to be able to allow a wrap up. And then we took 30 minutes to report back out to the group. So that was about 4 minutes per area. And again, it just highlights, and I was able to also collect people's notes at the end. The way that I split it up was, again, there's 8 different areas, and I looked at the people in the room and assigned them based on their sort of areas of expertise. So curriculum, our vice principals were in that group. Reconciliation, Service, and Justice, our Christian Service Director. Co-curricular programming, ecological justice, the human dignity and belonging was DEI, and that met well with interculturality. Communications and technology, that was our IT guy. Staff formation is the vice principal who oversaw that. And it actually worked pretty well because people, again, came with their own areas of expertise and were able to have conversations and brainstorm together. And then we were able to use that to be able to talk about next steps. So on the slides that Catherine will share with you, I went ahead and put into the slide deck all of the different items for each area so that you have those. And so this is what we did in the meeting is we just quickly went through, okay, area 2, here it is visually so that everybody could see it. What are some of the things that you saw as important? And then the other thing that I will add is that I really think that paper and pencil are helpful when brainstorming and also for collecting notes. So I made sure to print off a packet for each person in the room that had, again, 1 page per item. And the JSN has that so that they could jot down notes and collect that information. It made it much easier to be able to have that as a resource. So with that, Catherine, that's it in a nutshell. Is there anything else you would like me to say right now?
I don't think so, unless there is an immediate question before we pass over to Meagan, who will give more framing.
All right, I'll take it. It's good to meet and see you all, Meagan. And I supported getting the survey out 2 years ago and do not believe that 2 years have gone by since we have done this. So what Jennie described was a really strategic and thoughtful approach to how you collect this information, because with any information that we're gathering, it's sort of the quality of thought that you put into it is going to reflect back out, right? And how useful this process is. And so when we revised the survey a couple of years ago, we revised it in this way to say, instead of just sort of a checkbox, we were saying the questions are essentially, how important is this to you, right? How big a priority will it be? How much have you already invested in it? What's that level of effort? And then what are you actually doing? So we can start to catalog those things. But that question of how important is this to you and how big of a priority is what makes it useful on the back end, right? When we get those results back and we can say, okay, we identified these 6 areas, right, as a really high priority. Now we have a starting place. We can take a look at those. We can say, what are we doing? And that can really inform planning for next year. So the thinking behind this was always to try to make it as useful as possible, to make sure that it isn't just an exercise, right? The goal isn't just to check the boxes and turn this in, but to really make sure that it can be practically implemented at the school, that if you want it to have implications for what you're doing next year, that it can serve that purpose. And so the survey is designed that way, and the reports were designed that way. And I'll show you one of the reports from last year in a moment. This year, the survey will look largely the same. There will be a different pilot survey, sort of initial survey for pre-secondary schools. And that one will philosophically be the same, right? We'll be asking those schools to take a look at the relevant items for them that they've been working on and say, which of these, when I look down this list, is most important to us, right? That is a really high priority. And which of these are we really proud of with our work as a school? Because that, again, has the ability to say, what is it that we collectively can learn from each other on, and that we as a school team really want to focus on? So the concept will be the same. It'll look a little bit different. It's a little simpler because that group of pre-secondary schools will be doing this for the first time this year. But the intent is the same. Can we get clear about priorities, and then can we get clear about where we're implementing some of these programs really well so that we can learn from one another in that work? So that's the idea behind the way the questions are framed. And I do really encourage you all to think about how we're going to administer the survey so that you're getting enough voices at the table, and you're really using it strategically to say, if I want, this person in our building to have buy-in to this, that they're also part of that process. On the logistical front, this will go out middle of next week for the secondary schools, and you'll have a little over a month to fill it out. And so you can start thinking about if you need to build time in, and we'll give you additional details next week with that. So with that said, I do want to share my screen briefly. I want to show you what a report looked like last year. I won't guarantee that they will look exactly the same. It's always nice to make them a little prettier when I can, but the idea with these reports is to say, what are the areas that you said were a really high priority, and what's the other information that we have about that to help you make decisions around that? So this is for schools who I blanked out, but on item 1, right, core and elective course offerings, the school said, yeah, this is a big priority for us for the next year. This is something we want to focus on. And it's an area where we've only put a little bit of effort, right? This is kind of new for us. And so that front and center says this page of the report is worth our focus. And then what the report does is say, for all the programs, those check boxes that you saw on Jennie's slide presentation, is this something that your school has? Yes or no, right? And then how many other schools have already done that thing? So at this school, right, they do not have a world religions class, for example. Oops, and I just got rid of that. They don't have a world religions class, but almost all schools do. And so if I was looking for sort of what's the low-hanging fruit where there's a lot of best practices available, where we've already identified this as a priority, where we might be able to get some traction, I would look down this list and say, okay, we're not doing this program. Almost everybody does have this program. And so this is something that we might want to focus on. There's more detail, and this is not the most visually easy list, but this is how it was last year. There's more detail down here to say exactly who has this in place, right? And you can see down the list. And so if you wanted to do something that was much more specific, right, when we get into a composting program or things that fewer schools are doing, you can identify exactly who has those programs in place. So the bottom half of these pages was intended to say, who do I need to pick up the phone and call if I'm trying to implement something that's a little less sort of universal and where I want a good starting point. So the report is intended to reflect that same intentionality of process that Jennie was talking about, where if you as a team have said, this is really important to us, we understand the level of effort that we've put into us. This is trying to make it clearer to say, okay, if then you meet and say, what now, right? We know this is an important area. This is a starting point. This helps you say, where are those areas, those programs that we might want to push on a little bit more, and who else has those programs that we can learn from? So the report is really designed to help you have those conversations at your schools in a way that is helpful. This whole process is meant to be for you. So this report will be for the benefit of your school. Jennie said this also, but there's no implied or real evaluation with this, that this is not to say that schools who have all yeses down the line get extra points or anything like that. So the usefulness of this is up to you. You may look at this and say, I don't know why we said this was a priority, right? When I look down this list, there's really nothing here. That's fine. You can go on to the next page and find other programs. So it will always be, it's really designed to be a tool for your own planning for the school to take a look and say, what is it that we want to focus on? What are our priorities? And can this be a tool for us to plan for next year? To say, how can we get better at these things that we've identified as priorities? So that's the intention behind it. The survey itself, for those of you that did fill it out last year, will look largely the same. There's tweaks in some of the language and sort of how we define the skills, but the idea, the concept of it is the same, that you'll be asked to go through on SurveyMonkey. I have it up over here. Be asked to go through on SurveyMonkey and input for each one of those areas. So 1.1, what's the level, this is from last year, but what's the level of effort? What are the programs that you're currently doing? And then to what extent is this a priority, right? And again, thinking about how do I want to make those decisions so that this becomes a tool for our planning for next year, so that everybody who needs to be part of these conversations is part of them. I think it is one of the ways to get the most out of this process possible. But this is what it will look like, and we'll go through each one of the areas throughout the inventory.